Being a chartered manager means that you are a specialist in that area, and it means you've got all the skills to do the job to the best of its ability.
You are seen as a leader, a true leader who has credentials behind the great work you've already been doing.
It's enhanced my understanding, it's enhanced my skill set, it's improved my mindset.
It makes all the difference.
This session is recorded and will be available on the CMI website and YouTube channel. Join the conversation by using the live chat box for your questions and comments. We'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Reduce Your Footprint Practical Steps for Sustainable Action digital event. My name is Samia, and I'm an International Regional Development Manager at CMI. Don't forget to join the conversation by using the live chat box. Feel free to ask any questions you have for the speakers, and we'll answer as many as possible during the Q&A session. I will now hand over to Mohamed Hassan Sayed, Joint Stakeholder Lead of the CMI Southeast Board, to begin today's event. Over to you, Mohamed.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the event here. It's a pleasure to have you on board. My name is Mohamed Hassan. I'm the Stakeholder Lead in the Southeast Board for CMI, but I also am an academic at the University of Southampton, where I'm the Director of Chemical Engineering and an Associate Professor of Sustainable Engineering. And what I was hoping through today's session is to take you through an understanding not of sustainability and carbon footprinting, but the practical impacts of it. And we have distinguished guests here. I can't see my PowerPoint, Samia. Thank you very much. Okay. So basically, if you want to contribute comments or questions, please add them to the Q&A live session, and we'll address them towards the end of the session today. Now, this topic is important for us because across the UK and across the Europe, there is an expansion about adjusting the carbon footprinting and understanding what it is. It stems from the different policies that are merging around the systems here. And the talk is no longer about the slogans, it's more about the numbers and how we can quantify the numbers, understanding what they mean to us. Because the investors, the customers, everyone is starting to understand that these are quantifiable targets that we have to achieve, and we are supposed to credibly demonstrate these numbers here. So what's required from us nowadays is to actually commit to the net zero and net carbon. And these two definitions are intermittent with each other. They both relate to the same thing in terms of reducing your carbon that you have control over to as zero as possible. And anything that you don't have control over, you're offsetting by thinking about optimization and thinking about efficiencies and thinking about alternative balance and pathways throughout the systems here. And when we talk about them, leaders and investors in particular are always interested about the numbers. So it's no longer a trend. And the way they quantify it is in terms of the carbon dioxide equivalent, tons of carbon dioxide. So you take all the activities of the organizations doing in-house or out externally, and you quantify that to what does it mean in terms of the carbon emissions that you have here. Because carbon equals risks, and if green accounting and other possibilities merge, then there will be financial repercussions on us, on all of us here. And the way carbon footprinting is measured, it's about across the entire greenhouse gas, but they're all equated to what carbon emissions are going to be quantified in these elements. And initially it started off with the scope 1, then it built up to scope 2, and now we're in scope 3. And essentially scope 1 is all about inside your house, within the boundaries that you have, what can you control and how you can mitigate it. Scope 2 became anything that you purchase to the in-house that you have or within your boundaries is the one you control for it. But scope 3 is the tricky one now because it moves outside your boundaries into a wider scope of boundaries. It talks about the supply chain, it talks about the logistics, it talks about the procurement. It integrates you into the wider aspects of the entire element, and it requires a lot of collaboration. within the system for us to address these issues here. So today, our speakers are going to give us a perspective of how leaders address the carbon decarbonization elements and how they translate the leadership strategies into operational aspects. And then we'll talk about some academic endeavors here. At this point, before I introduce the speaker, I'd like to apologize because Professor Alam, who's advertised to be with us today, unfortunately can't join us due to an emergency travel issues. But the other speakers are on board, I'm glad to say, and we are joined by Graham, who's going to be, he's the CEO of Ilika, and Sherry Cook, who's the Operations Compliance Officer at Ilika, and Dr. Farouk Shari, who's the Senior Lecturer at Nottingham Trent University. Now, it's going to be very exciting because the first presentation is going to be by Graham and Sherry combined together to give us a vision and a link between how leaders require it and how operational managers implement it. So without further ado, I'll pass you on to Graham and Sherry to give their perspectives on the topics.
Thank you, Mohamed, for that fantastic introduction. I see my video is frozen. Hopefully that isn't disturbing the audio feed from where I am. So first of all, I'm going to speak a little bit about Ilika and about the type of company we are, just to put it in context, talk about the products that we make. And then Sherry is going to add her perspective on how we manage some of the ESG aspects associated with that. So first of all, what is Ilika? Ilika is a pioneer in solid-state battery technology, and we have solutions that are applicable for industrial IoT, sometimes referred to as wireless sensor technology, in medtech, for electric vehicles, and also for consumer appliances. The company has actually been going for nearly 22 years now. We started as a startup from the University of Southampton. We've got our headquarters just outside of Southampton in a place called Romsey. We've got a couple of facilities. We've got our development facility as well as a scale-up capability. And we weren't always a solid-state battery company. In fact, for the first 14 years of our life, we specialized in the development of functional materials. But then we realized that there was a big demand for improved lithium-ion batteries, and that's what solid-state batteries really are. So we focus now on that product development, and we raised enough capital in order to fund that journey. And we employ about 70 people across the two parts of our business, across the Stereax business, which are our micro batteries, and then what we call our Goliath batteries, which are the larger batteries we make for EVs and consumer electronics. So let's have a look at a bit more detail. Sherry, if you can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we've got these two product lines with very diverse end markets, actually. I mean, obviously, the medical device market is very different to the automotive sector. But actually, there is a common technology connection between the two product lines. Our business model is that we have an asset-light approach where we actually make our product on pilot lines to demonstrate the process and the functionality of the products. And then we license those products through to manufacturing partners for scale-up. We have quite a big patent portfolio and generally a lot of know-how in the sector. And let's have a quick look at what these two product lines are all about. First of all, Stereax, these are miniature cells that are now licensed to a large US headquartered company called Cirtec Medical, and they are capable of manufacturing our batteries at scale. Actually, Part of the reason why we're partnered with a US company is that a lot of our end customers for these batteries are US medtech companies, and they like a short supply chain. So we transferred the technology through to a manufacturing center in the US. In fact, it's based in a place called Lowell in Massachusetts. And they have a very strong customer relationship management team that works together with the end customers in order to integrate this product into those devices. Goliath isn't quite so mature as a product. I guess many of you on the call today will be EV drivers, and solid state batteries is often talked about quite a lot, actually, in the press, in the media, as being a solution to some of the remaining concerns that people might have about EVs. I mean, principally, people are worried about cost because EVs typically tend to be more expensive than the equivalent ICE vehicles, the equivalent internal combustion engine vehicles. They, often have issues around range, so people can have range anxiety, and they want to be able to be sure that actually they can cover the distance between where they set out and sometimes a distant destination. And also they want to be able to charge the vehicle rapidly if they do need to stop for a recharge en route. And solid state batteries can go a long way towards addressing these issues. So the way that we work is that we're actually sending out our prototype cells that you see pictured on the right-hand side there to OEMs and what the automotive industry call tier ones, which are basically the suppliers of the primary suppliers of batteries to the branded vehicle manufacturers, the OEMs. And those batteries are being evaluated with a view to choosing the appropriate manufacturing scale-up route. Good. Next slide, please, Sherry. I think it's over to you at this point. So Sherry's actually going to give you some practical guidance on some of the things that we do about making sure we have a decarbonized process. And actually, battery manufacturing is quite an energy-intense process. And so it's really important that the processes that we optimize take that into account, and we do our best to minimize that footprint. Over to you, Sherry.
Thanks, Graham. So I'm Sherry Cook, and I lead ESG compliance and quality at Ilika. And I just want to say thank you to the team for inviting me to present today. So I'm here to talk about Ilika's approach to carbon monitoring and emissions reduction. Now, these aren't necessarily the methods that you and your organisation would or currently do adopt. However, I do hope that it gives you some insight into the practical application, particularly if you're at the start of your journey. So a bit of background to our why and how we have approached this. So Ilika is a medium-sized AIM-listed company, and there has been little in terms of regulation for us to disclose against. However, over the past several years, we have seen increased stakeholder requirements and requests for disclosure against climate and ESG. Now, these have included UK grants, annual reporting requirements, institutional investor requests, and more recently, inclusion of climate risks in ISO standards. In addition, a number of regulations are coming into effect with increased requirements. An example is being the EU battery regulation, which references life cycle analysis, product carbon footprint, and product end of life. And this is where Scope 3 emissions monitoring and reporting is coming in. So Ilika has been on its sustainability journey for a few years now. However, to effectively establish and execute our strategy, it was imperative that top-down buy-in was secured. So we have an ESG committee, and it is therefore chaired by one of our independent non-executive directors. And it also has representation from our executive leaders and technical nominees throughout the business. Our ESG strategy links to an internal framework, and this is our ESG framework. This sets the expectations for not only ethical procurement in our supply chain, but environmental commitments such as waste minimisation and carbon footprint monitoring. We report bi-monthly to the board, and we have business KPIs to ensure consistent oversight, monitoring and accountability for these items, and to ensure progression of our activities as opposed to stagnating. So I'll just move on to the next slide. Continuing on this how for the implementation with a particular focus on carbon footprint, Ilika has established a Green Champions team, which feeds into our ESG framework and focuses specifically on environmental improvements and carbon accounting. Now, there are a number of methods that can be used for carbon monitoring, and these include internal emissions tracking and external accounting. Now, this can be a data-intensive process, and so the business chose to perform external accounting with an accredited third party. This gives us verified transparency and also allows our technical team to focus on development as well as integrating the results of our carbon monitoring. Now, as you will see on the graph presented, we made a conscious decision for the first couple of years to monitor and understand our Scope 1 and 2 emissions before moving into Scope 3. Now, this was for a number of reasons. This also echoes what Mohamed mentioned earlier, but primarily this allowed us to drive down targeted data-driven improvements, and we could affect the most change initially. Now, many of us who have encountered Scope 3 understand that there is a significant level of variability in terms of the data confidence. However, it is an ever-increasing requirement to monitor, track, and improve on Scope 3 emissions. Now, following completion of our initial carbon accounting, we developed our steps towards a carbon reduction strategy. So we looked at quick wins and operational optimization, and this included switching to green energy tariffs, lighting improvements and amendments, waste reduction, and enhanced refrigerant monitoring. In more recent years, after we've sustained those activities, we've moved to localized monitoring systems to analyze and drive down our usage further in the business. Now, with transparency, there have and can be some limitations to reduction of carbon footprint in these areas. As an example, leased buildings without green initiatives or agreements in your leased contract can restrict some of the improvements which can further be made to reduce emissions. And this is something that I'd recommend considering if you're entering into a lease agreement. I should note that it is also important to establish how you are reporting and communicating emissions, because if you look at the graph, it appears negative during 2021 and 2023, as there was a significant jump in Scope 1 and 2 emissions. Now, these are direct emissions that have been calculated for Scope 1 and Scope 2, so direct and indirect, these can be directly linked to expansion of our activities. So as Graham mentioned earlier, we expanded into a second building, we installed additional equipment and increased our headcount. However, instead of reporting the exact figures of CO2 emissions, if you looked at CO2 emissions per employee or per million of revenue or any other appropriate metric, this will give a clearer and more balanced picture. I will talk very briefly about carbon offsetting. I appreciate it's a very controversial subject for some, and there has been a lot of greenwashing associated. My recommendation would be reduce the emissions as much as possible and then consider offsetting to a gold verified standard if deemed appropriate. Another consideration with regards to a form of offsetting is planning for the future, whereby pending issuance units or PIUs may be purchased, and these give a delayed impact but will prevent continual paid offsets in the long term. Now, probably most interesting to the majority of those attending this call is Scope 3, especially the supply chain emissions. Ilika has reported our first round of Scope 3 emissions in our last annual report, and we will shortly be reporting our second round in the pending annual report. However, the first round did identify some opportunities for improvement, both in data collection and within our supply chain. An example is the method in which Scope 3 analysis is recorded. So this was originally performed solely on our SIC codes and a spend basis. And it means regardless of where the product was purchased, whether it was domestic or internationally, the emissions associated was the same, and it gave us low data confidence. So we've since adjusted our process and utilised a carbon accounting system, and this distinguishes the location of origin and adjusts the emissions factor accordingly. It's also able to incorporate product carbon footprint, which some organisations do provide on their websites, and this also gives us better confidence in data. And it's really important to have confidence in your data to support your data-driven targets. This then allows us to move forward with measurable and time-bound reductions of Scope 3 emissions. With this graph that I'm presenting here on the Scope 3 piece, to give you an understanding of our supply chain Scope 3 emissions, 26% of that total was spend attributed to suppliers that provided purchase goods, and 53% of that was capital goods, meaning 79% of our total Scope 3 emissions were supply chain. Now, we understood for the year that capital goods were typically a one-off. And again, this was SIT code based, so maybe disproportionate. However, within our supply chain process and procurement activities, we've identified opportunities to reduce future emissions whilst continuing to purchase our required goods for the business. We're also working on a sustainable supply chain program, whereby we've taken a Pareto style approach, which looks at the top 20% spend on the highest supply chain emissions for our purchase goods. And this has an aim to understand the actual carbon footprint versus the estimated, and we're also liaising with our suppliers to further improve and reduce our carbon footprint and emissions. Conscious of time, I'll move to the next slide. So as a business, we focus on the 4 C's in our ESG and carbon emission framework, and this is compliance, commitment, continuous improvement, and culture. Now, earlier on in the slide pack, I discussed the reasons why companies should or would do carbon monitoring and emissions reporting. This is the why, and it's essential that your organisation understands this. It sets the core foundation for your strategy and your continued action. And the regulatory landscape continues to evolve. Regulatory requirements are not disappearing. Your organisation needs to ensure sufficient risk mitigation, especially with regards to climate. Now, business sizes not currently affected by mandatory disclosures are being encouraged to adopt voluntary analysis and reporting, and this is because there is anticipated future changes in regulation. However, meeting these standards isn't just about avoiding fines, it's about business integrity and prolonging your activities as an organisation. And then moving on to commitment, in the how section of my first slide, I spoke about our business strategy. We have our ESG committee, we have our framework, and we also have our green champions. Now, we have a leadership promise in Ilika to prioritise environment alongside progression, but it's moved from we have to we choose to. And for your organisation, standing firm on sustainability and considering all aspects of your business activities goes from not only waste reduction and recyclability, but to ethical procurement, circular economy. And it's not only good from a green perspective, but they offer financial gain, and this will also support the commitment to these activities. Now, I think many of us have experienced the tricky of it, which is culture. And cultural change doesn't happen overnight. It happens over a prolonged period of consistency and engagement. And if the team don't care about what we're trying to do, then it's just noise to them. And that is some areas where organisations may trip up. Culture is where the magic happens. And it's important for every person in the room to feel that reducing their footprint is part of their role, and they should understand the effect and impact both professionally and personally. So bringing the cultural piece into effect, some of the activities that we've performed to support positive culture includes not only that commitment to minimising resources, but visual aids to encourage recycling. And we also have TED Talks and other engagement activities to continue that discussion and keep people aware of what the business is doing, how they can play their part, and so on. In the Scope 3 banner, we also have the green travel initiatives, and this includes EV leasing, cycle to work schemes, and EV charging stations for our employees. Now, we could have just left those, but we chose to implement engagement activities such as company-wide triathlon, which supported with encouraging our teams to use greener methods of commuting. And we noticed that a few of our employees were quite competitive and have continued to use green travel in their commute. And the software that we have used for our carbon accounting has provided individual emissions for each person for their activities. And this, as it's visible to them, it's encouraged people to adopt alternative methods of transport after seeing their impact. And this brings me to continuous improvement. And those of us who follow management systems and management standards will know the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. And it's essential to recognise that sustainability isn't a destination, it is a practice that needs to continue. We have to adopt and continue that Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle with regards to carbon emission monitoring, carbon footprint, environmental engagement, sustainability, because it's vital for that process, as is leveraging innovation. And it is important to monitor, reduce, evaluate, and then iterate, and finding the next reduction or improvement linked to your emissions and activities. And this can be as simple as looking at how you can further reduce natural gas consumption through newer or alternative means, or sourcing alternative packaging or transportation for your product. Please remember that you should begin or continue your sustainability journey because of organisational and climate resilience, not just to tick boxes. Work with your peers, your teams and your network to understand and establish improvements, and know that sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back and pivoting is perfectly acceptable. Journeys aren't always direct from A to B. Sometimes we take back roads, sometimes we hit a bump in the road, but we need to continue moving forward. And it's really important because climate risk is a real thing and we have commitments not only to ourselves, but to the wider population. Before I head off, here are my closing thoughts. Establish the why. What is the reason that you're on the sustainability journey? Know your how, so the strategy, the resources and the expectations. Get your team on board and weave it into your organisational culture, and be transparent with your reporting. Be honest about where you are on your journey. Explain if you've got peaks and troughs, as I've just done. And it builds trust by being transparent than pretending you're at the top and everything's perfect. I believe I've run over ever so slightly, but thank you for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thank you very much to Sherry and Graham for giving us an insight on Ilika and the way that that strategy of an organization that is topical at the moment with fuel cells and energy has translated the information in terms of ESG and the greenwashing, avoiding the pits there, and building up into scope 3, and some great insights on how the process should be a journey and how we should take it through, being transparent about it here. Our next guest is Dr. Farouk, and he's from Nottingham Trent University, who's going to reflect to us from an academic and a technology point of view how we can tackle these issues. Dr. Farouk, it's all yours now.
Thanks, Professor Mohamed. So my name is Farouk Sher. I'm Senior Lecturer at the Department of Engineering at Nottingham Trent University. So I'm going to talk about more technical side of reducing the footprints and what practical steps we can take towards sustainable actions. So looking at the global climate context and emission trajectory, so the current atmospheric CO2 concentration have reached above 420 ppm, the level which is unprecedented in millions of years. And global surface temperature has risen by approximately 1.1 degrees centigrade since the pre-industrial baseline. Achieving 1.5 degrees centigrade goal requires to reduce about 45% reductions in global emissions by 2030. So the organization must shift from why to how, decarbonization. So looking at this picture, so this showing the targets. So the net zero emissions by 2040, how we can achieve these. So if you take 2020 as a baseline, so till 2030, looking at the scope 1 and scope 2, which is combined operations related direct greenhouse gas emissions and operations related indirect greenhouse gas emissions, it can reduce 71% per megawatt. And if we talk about the total as absolute, so it can give us 42% reductions carbon. And looking at the trend 2040, so combined scope 1 and scope 2 can give 98% reduction per megawatt hour, and scope 3 can give us almost 20, which is total emissions, 90% emissions reductions. What are the theoretical foundation strategic innovation frameworks? So there are a few points which are very important in this one. So first, strategic innovation is the primary blueprint for achieving global sustainability in industrial ecosystems, and transitions require a multidisciplinary approach, bringing engineering with socioeconomic ethics. There's different books. I also had one book on Net Zero, which explored the foundations of technology required for the systematic innovations. And success hinges basically on the equilibrium between anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions reduction and removal. So talking, if you look at this slide, it shows the regional landscape. So Southeast faces specific challenges due to high transportation density, and major commercial infrastructure transportation network currently contributes about 35% of regional carbon footprints in the urban clusters. So leveraging these local innovation hubs is essential for driving practical region decarbonization. So regional funding mechanism, like there is a Green Southeast Net Zero Hub, are vital for the sustainable investments in that region. Another thing which is important is AI and digitalization. So there are 5 different adoption in logistics which can be used to reduce the carbon footprint. So AI algorithms can optimize transport networks, reducing fuel consumption by up to 15%. And machine learning can enable predictive analytics for the energy demand, yielding about 20% saving in industrial loads. Digitalization allows managers to tackle with real-time footprints across a complex supply chain tires, and simulation tools provide risk-free environment to test various sustainable and investment strategies. So these are the right side picture shows that these are the 5 steps which could be taken as an to AI adoption towards logistics to reduce those carbon footprints. Another important parameter is industrial decarbonization, because industries is one of the main sources for our CO2 emissions. And what are the process engineering prospectus? Chemical process engineering focuses on the waste heat recovery, improving the thermal efficiency by 30%, and transitioning to electrification of industrial processes, which will be less dependent on fossil fuels, is very critical for removing on-site combustion, and developing advanced level carbon capture storage utilization technology remains essential to abate industrial emissions. The process habit resets are required to optimize the resources using a minimum industrial waste streams. The transitioning transport, how we can move away from the fossil fuels, so we can go with the green fuel alternatives. For example, hydrogenated vegetable oils provides near about 90% reductions in CO2 emissions in high vehicles, and also accelerating the shifts to electric fleets via vital for the light logistics and passenger transports networks. Sustainable management involves also the thermal model logistics to minimize the carbon intensity of freight, and investment in the regional charging infrastructure is also prerequisite for large-scale business-led changes, and still a lot of work is still required to be done on this area. Talking about circular economy, a framework for resources efficiency, moving beyond the linear model, which is the take, make, waste, is not negotiable for long-term survival. So we need to come towards circular economy. So resources recovery strategy ensure that the waste stream becomes secondary raw material, and designing product for disassembly and to reduce the systematic demands for virgin materials. Closing loop reduces scope 3 emissions by eliminating energy intensive raw materials extraction. The next slide is same figure is a bit enlarged, which was on the last one. So how we can implement the circular economy, talking about with renewables and with other fine minerals. Looking at the practical steps, so there are different practical steps which we need to take to overcome these, and we need to achieve those targets. So practical step number 1 is comprehensive carbon auditing. So step 1 and 2, emission represents the immediate baseline and direct energy use of the organization. Step 3, emissions typically constitute over 70% of the total organization footprint. So accurate measurement via activity-based carbon accounting is mandatory for identifying hotspots. And effective management requires transparency with third-party vendor and tier 2 supply partners. The next slide is showing the scope 1, which is direct emissions, scope 2 indirect emissions, and again scope 3 indirect emissions, which are upstream activities, and step 3 indirect emissions from the downstream activities. Right, practical step 2, low carbon technology adoption. So prioritize quick wins, LED lights, high efficiency building insulations, and thermostat optimization. Invest in smart metering and Internet of Things sensors for real-time visibility into operational energy waste. Retrofitting legacy HVAC systems can reduce building emissions by up to 25%, and establishing psychological safety to allow teams to pilot and fall with the green innovation safety. So this next slide showing the exploring the policy framework and funding options. So talking about navigation, different type of funding, evolving policy frameworks is very, very critical for long-term business-led sustainable investment. So Greater Southeast Net Zero Hub provides a gateway to the regional project financing. Innovate UK offers competitive grants for AI and innovation-led carbon reduction pillars, and capitalize on R&D tax credit for sustainability, focusing on industrial innovation projects. Right. So overcome strategic barriers and resilience. High upfront capital cost remains the primary barrier for many SMEs and managers. Leadership resilience and intention are required to maintain the momentum during the journey. 2050 for fostering culture, care, and safety prevents burnout during the organizational habit resets, and overcome short-term by focusing on the long-term ROI. Sustainable energy security is also one of the important parameters to achieve these goals. So looking at the future outlook, scaling sustainable performance, enabling for 2026 offer a unique window to the to oppose and realign leadership approach to the well-being. So coupling growth from carbon emissions is a new hallmark of the manager's excellence. Scaling net zero solution will drive both high performance and team motivation in the future. Sustainability is no longer cost center. It is a competitive advantage in the global market. So there's some of the references related to the vision, and I would like to thank you, all of you, for listening to me. So, and thank you, Professor Mohamed and CMI, for inviting me for this presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Farouk. It's been very insightful to listen to you about how we can tackle scope 1 and 2 and the targets you've set up and the barriers that all of us are facing. Now we're going to move over to another session, which is all about the Q&A. So feel free to put all your questions on the live chat so we can address them together with you. Before the session, there were a couple of questions that were sent to us, so I'll address them first. The first question that I got was from Tracy, and she says, I run a fleet of HG vehicles on diesel. What is the best green fuel alternatives? Now, before I pass the elements to the panel to have a discussion around it, my recommendation will be is there's no right solution. The solution has to be spoke to your situation and what you have. So what you need to do is analyze the different routes that you have, look at the different fueling stations, the different durations that you want to operate at, and then come up with the informed decision based on that element. But that's just a personal opinion, so I'll pass it on to the panel to add their expertise.
I would suggest if they are having a diesel fleet, so they could go towards biodiesel and most appropriated hydro-treated vegetable oils, which are quite frequently used as a biodiesel, high-quality biodiesel. So these kind of fuels can reduce about 90% emissions, CO2 emission in HGVs.
Okay. Thank you very much. What about the panel from Ilika, Sherry and Graham?
I agree with Dr. Farouk. He actually took my answer of talking about hydrotreated vegetable oil. You can have approximately a 90% reduction in some emissions, and that requires very little engine modification.
Thank you very much. The next question I have is actually two questions that I have from Amanda. The first one states, after scope 1 and 2 easy wins, how do you benchmark and reduce scope 3 with third parties? And her other question is, how are you tackling scope 3 emissions in your organization? Both questions are interlinked with each other, and I think the team from Ilika highlighted that quite well. From our perspective in the university, we do have a policy, the triple helix policy, and the way I tackled these elements when I was addressed about it in chemical engineering, my nugget within Southampton, I focused on the procurement because my task was to build new labs and a new department. So I looked at the procurement element, and that's where I added a mandated greener scope. So everything had to comply to energy, everything had to be quantified in terms of the tenders demonstrating carbon emissions for us to then be able to justify the investment into it moving forward, because we are building into the future in a sustainable world. But that was, as I said, I'm a small piece within the organization, and I'll open the scope now to the panels to have a discussion around it. Team from Ilika, would you like to go first?
Happy to. So answering the question, we performed our scope 3 analysis for the first time last year. So this is a relatively new process that we're embarking on. As mentioned in the presentation, we have adopted a Pareto style approach on the highest purchased goods with the highest emissions. And we're working with those suppliers on a case-by-case basis, looking at their sustainable strategy, their product carbon footprint, and working in a collaborative manner. With the capital equipment, as mentioned in the presentation, we appreciate that it's a one-off, but there will continue to be one-offs in the future, and that's why your sustainable in-house policy for purchasing is really important. I don't know, Graham, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I think the challenge of scope 3 in an organization that procures goods globally is that there is some variability actually in terms of the commitment of those organizations to being transparent about emissions. And so sometimes actually trying to come up with benchmarking across suppliers of similar goods can be a bit of a challenge because not everybody, buys into the same sort of philosophy on this. But I would say as long as you as an organization adopts a consistent approach, then eventually, the suppliers will get used to this type of question, and the data that you get will be more reliable and more comparable over time.
Dr. Farouk, anything to add here?
Yes, the scope 1 and scope 2, basically, that more linked like personal use. Let's take an example like the scope 1 is like your own gas stove or company van, and scope 2 is like electricity we buy to run our kitchen light or the lights or the fridges. The scope 3 is a bit broader, which is the everything else. It is coming like a farm, growing the food, delivery trucks, bringing in the goods and the packaging, for example, and what the customers are buying. And after that, if you talk example of the industry, so waste treatment, if you talk about organization like universities or staff commuting and business travel, so on. So the scope 3 is basically is a huge and a broader. So this depends upon organization to organization. So let's example our university, for example. So they are giving special credits to people who are traveling by bicycles, for example. And the fleet which we have, like delivery vans, they are mostly electric. And similarly, some of those are on hydrogen as well. So that is one of the best examples. So another thing is that the scope 3 is for many organizations is very important and biggest part of their footprints, and usually it is about 70 to 95%. If we talk about in percentage wise. So because the suppliers and logistics are the huge for any type of organization. So that's, of course, that's one of the important steps. They're very good questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much to the panel. I have another pre-question that comes from a team, Sarah, Jasmine, and Kim. And their question is, best way to reduce carbon footprint in healthcare and care homes? Now, that's a diverse topic away from the fuel cells that we talked about in Ilika, but I think the same principles apply about scope 1 and 2 is inside your boundaries. So look at the kind of boilers, the HVACs, the utilization of the space that you have to address scope 1. Look at the purchased electricities and energies that you utilize and try and quantify that in terms of scope 2. And in terms of scope 3, we start looking at the procurement, the commuting of the staff to the location, the other factories in terms of other factors in terms of policies merging in the healthcare that requires you to use certain equipments. Look at the supply chain that you have in terms of supplying the foods and supplying the equipment and the PPEs that you use regularly, and see how that impacts on the system. I'll pass it on to the panel now to add their comments onto this question. Dr. Farouk, do you want to take this? Oh, sorry, Graham, go for it.
No, I was going to say, your answer is pretty comprehensive there, Mohamed. I think it covers all of the angles. I would say the easiest thing you can do is, probably go to your electricity supplier and ask about renewable electricity if you're not doing that already, or consider changing your supplier to a provider of renewable electricity. That's probably the lowest hanging fruit and something that can be done in literally half an hour and has quite a big impact.
So I know too much about the healthcare because my wife actually manages her own company in terms of healthcare supply, staff supply. So it's one of the things I'm addressing on a daily basis with her. Now, I move on to the questions that I have from the guests that we have. And we have guests from Malaysia, Saudi, and different parts of the UK. Wow, we're international today. One of the questions here is directed to Ilika. What is the more important for Ilika in terms of the company's approach to sustainable actions, economic, environment, or ethical reasons? I'll leave that to the team Ilika to address. Sherry.
Okay, I'll take this, Graham. So Ilika's primary responsibility is to our shareholders who do expect an economic return on their investments. However, we need to work and do that return in an environmentally and ethically responsible manner. None of them work in isolation, and in modern businesses, these three pillars need to be interconnected. So it's understanding all three requirements as a sustainable business. And we need to consider climate efficiency and risk management as well as our ecological footprint. We can't be treating them as individual items. They have to be an integrated strategy.
Thank you very much. I have another question here from Victoria. What are the economic, political, and leadership barriers to the solutions shared during this session becoming more mainstream? Okay. The economic, I think Dr. Farouk addressed this during his presentation, where he said there was a lot of barriers facing the whole sustainability transition to net carbon element in terms of, first of all, CapEx and OpEx. In God we trust, but the pounds is always the mighty one. And it's high capital investment and long-term in terms of recuperating or rates of return. That adds a barrier. And I think another point that we raised is leadership adaptability to the concept of moving away from the traditional practice into a new practice element. And I think we also highlighted the elements in terms of the culture within the organization and how can we encourage the culture to adapt to the new policies to move beyond the requirements. And I think the point that Sherry highlighted importantly is data. The value of the information of the data, the quality of the data. Once we move into scope 3, where it's no longer within your boundaries, it is integrating different systems together, and you start having these multi-Venn diagrams integrating sets of data. What is the true value of the data and the reality, and do you have confidence in the data to apply it? So it's a juggling act, and I'll pass it on to the experts now to address it further on.
Thanks, Mohamed. Just like to add a few political barriers. So, like there are in political changes, like government policies, like stop-start initiatives, or different type of incentives, and also slow planning and grid connections, for example. And one of the unclear rules for the reporting, for example. So these are a few political barriers, and there are some leadership barriers as well, like weak leadership at a broader level, not thinking carbon cuts to the core KPIs, and the budget and in budget issues as one of the parameters as well. All organizations are not having that much budget who can spend towards more frequently for the carbon cuts or can be very, very fast. So these are some of the additions to the Mohamed. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Does Team Ilika have anything to add?
Just to add that there's been significant variability in local and national regulation, and that has seen misreporting from various companies. And again, it's really, really important to understand what you need to report to and the methods in which you're going to do that.
Thank you very much. I have another question here that just came in from Irene. I work for an e-commerce company selling fashion worldwide. How can we move away from plastic bags and still protect our product from the elements during transport to customers? That's a very detailed question, and it's a global question. I don't know where to start here because it's far away from my element. I think you're looking at, you need to maintain the visibility, you need to maintain the quality of the storage of your products, but at the same time, every carrier, every plastic bag, every holder has a carbon footprinting. So if I was to address this issue from an academic point of view, the first thing will be is to do a life cycle inventory and a life cycle analysis to look at your entire supply chain for the plastic bags and quantify what are the components coming in, what are the equivalency carbon dioxide, where are the pinch points where the maximum emissions are occurring, and then we will start addressing that in a positive manner by trying to look at efficient ways or replaceable ways to actually mitigate that circumstances. And that's my opinion. I'll pass it on to the panelist, Dr. Farouk.
Yes, so the first suggestion is that you can use the paper mailing bags, which are the water resistance. So this is one of the options to switch from the plastic bags. Excuse me. And other thing is there should be the rainproof. For example, if you're sending your very expensive materials, of course, because of moisture and rain, so there should be the rainproof and other weatherproof conditions. So I will add same as Professor Mohamed said. So we should have some full life cycle assessment about that. So that is one of the things which could be adopted to get rid of those plastic bags.
I would say also, actually, I wouldn't beat yourself up too much about using plastic bags. Most industries around the world still do. And actually, the reality is that the carbon footprint for plastic bags is often lower than the carbon footprint for making waterproof paper alternatives. Actually, making a paper bag is quite energy intensive. I don't disagree with the advice that a full carbon analysis would give you some insight into that, but that can be a bit of an ask, actually, if you're running a company that perhaps doesn't have the resources to do that type of analysis. But clearly, making sure that the amount of plastic is minimized and that you optimize your packaging is going to have a contribution. I don't know, Sherry, whether you've got a different view to me on that.
I don't disagree. Life cycle analysis is important. So I would look to work with your suppliers of said bags. Technology is progressing at an amazing rate, and they might have new alternatives. So we've spoken about paper bags, but there's also cornstarch and compostable mailers. And if you ask the question, you might not get an answer, but you'll get an answer. You might not get the answer that you want, but you'll get an answer that can give you an indication of where to go next.
Thank you very much. Following on from the points that we've just discussed here, I've got another question. Is it true that manufacturing EV causes more pollution? And if that is so, how different is it from the fuel-powered vehicles? I think this is an exclusive question to Ilika.
Yeah, well, it doesn't have to be exclusive. Maybe Farouk's got some interesting insights into this as well. But actually, the reality is that EVs do have a higher carbon footprint when they are first manufactured than normal cars, right? Internal combustion engine vehicles. And the reason for that is that actually the process for manufacturing batteries is really energy intensive. So when a new EV goes on the road, it already has a significant carbon debt. And it spends its lifetime then offsetting that initial carbon debt with reduced emissions when it's on the road, particularly if the electricity that's used to recharge the vehicle is generated from renewable sources. So clearly where you are in the world has got a massive impact on that, right? Because some countries have a much higher percentage of renewables than other countries. If you're driving that vehicle in China, it's probably using electricity that's generated predominantly in a coal-fired power station. Whereas if you're driving it in Scandinavian countries, probably got a large percentage of renewables from hydroelectric and wind. Actually, Volvo did a fascinating study on this on their XC40 vehicle, which is sort of available as either a battery electric vehicle or a normal diesel version. And they worked out, depending on where you are in the world, that the vehicle has to drive somewhere upwards of 40,000 miles before you offset that initial carbon debt if you plumbed for the battery vehicle. So, something to bear in mind.
Thank you very much. Dr. Farouk, do you have any?
That's quite a tricky question, to be honest. So somehow I agree, yes. So
Thank you.
the EV, when you are building the EV, that's more energy intensive. And of course, when you have more energy, you need to have more carbon emissions as well. But if you just compare overall, so the EV starts in a dirtier way, to build, but they usually become cleaner, overall after driving for a while. If you take example of the UK, so the EV which is charged here, for example, is coming from renewables. So that's why you could say that it is not charging from the electricity which is being generated from the coal-fired power stations or diesel. So this way it is cleaner. Again, I agree with other panel. So it depends upon the location as well. If you're somewhere, in India or you're China, or for example, UK. So if you talk about Europe or UK, for example, so most of the electricity are coming, for example, renewable. So this is much cleaner as compared to other countries.
Thank you very much. I think we're coming towards the end of the session. Can I have my PowerPoint slide up, please? Thank you very much. I mean, today has been an eye-opener to look at how the leader looked at that concept, how the operational managers have addressed the concept in terms of implementing the Scope 3, and listening to Dr. Farouk about how the academics are providing a synergy in terms of the policies and in terms of the overcoming the hurdles that the industry is facing nowadays. And all I wanted to do in the last slide is to put a few elements for you. If you have any questions, feel free to communicate with us to address these points for you. CMI offer a lot of courses on leadership and management from level 5 to level 7 to become chartered. And there are emerging courses in sustainability that will help these elements. There's technical inputs that can be provided to you from universities and local authorities as well. And through the universities, we have endless amount of projects that we conduct with the students that could provide a nucleus for you to start building on in terms of modeling or databasing these elements here for you. And one of the things that Dr. Farouk has alluded to is there's funding available through the government, and one of the greatest funding available is the partnership with the university through the knowledge transfer partnership, where the funding comes from the government, the knowledge comes from the university, but you are the custodial of the operations to help enhance your business performances over a period of 5 years. So there are many options for you to engage with CMI and with us in a different capacities here. So as we come towards the end of our session today, I really would like to express my gratitude to the panelists who've been here with you, Graham, Sherry, and Farouk, for giving us an insight on not just the trending themes, but actually how the trending themes are being implemented. I'd also like to thank everyone behind the scenes, Samia, Mary, who were in the background supporting us and operating all this fancy softwares that we don't know how to utilize. So thank you very much to everyone here. Small steps, I think that was the message today. Start in-house and build on it, and hopefully one day we'll all succeed in achieving beyond Scope 3. Thank you very much for attending today. I'll pass you back to our host. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mohamed, for today's session. Thank you very much for our host for guiding today's discussion. Thank you, Sherry, Dr. Farouk, and Rami for your insight and expertise. Stay tuned to hear more about CMI membership, and thank you for joining us.
Don't forget, as a CMI member, you can find the latest management and leadership insights at managers.org.uk. If you're not yet a member, Join our community to discover CMI confidence with on-demand resources, our network of mentors, and industry-leading accreditations.